Hello, I'm Jim Benson from Modus Cooperandi and Modus Institute, and we're talking today with Nancy White. Nancy White is an international expert in collaboration and managing and working with distributed teams. We're going to talk to her a little bit today about distributed teams. So, Nancy, could you talk a little bit about initially just how you got started in collaboration? It's kind of an interesting
rabbit hole.
Yes, yes.
So first I say I am a practitioner, not an expert, because I feel that in all this work it is about the practice, not about simply being able to tick off the list of 10 good things, because you're always working in context. So I'm a practitioner. I fell down the rabbit hole of working in a distributed manner when I was running a small internet startup and needed to understand about online communities, and jumped into Howard Rheingold's Electric Minds, which was the first venture-funded public online community on the internet that really had presence. And, this was the era of, online community in 96, 97. And I had this amazing experience of really deep, profound, text-based asynchronous conversations with people from all over the world. I was conversing with, a professor who was sitting on his patio in Jerusalem, and, a guy up in Vancouver who was doing amazing things. And it was like, wow, there's this medium that can allow us to have these really profound connections. And then Howard lost the funding, SoftBank pulled out, the whole business model, the first boom and bust came quickly. And we said, you can't take our community away from us. And he says, well, here, Nancy, you've done community organizing, and, so-and-so, you've done programming, go for it. And so we tried to, quote unquote, save the community. And for me, the experience was an enormous failure. I had been doing community organizing for lots of different purposes for many years and felt that I had a good handle on group process. And here was something that was so good and then went to so bad. And I became profoundly interested in why and what were the practices that enabled us to connect better online. And that eventually snowballed into working with a lot of distributed groups, distributed communities of practice, being part of or working with distributed teams. And in the subsequent years, broader and more open networks of learning are working, where we weren't necessarily collaborating with shared tasks, but we were cooperating towards some similar ends, but everybody was working on their own. But the cooperation allowed us to do more together than we could apart. And over the years, there's still that pattern of, how can it be so good and so bad? And here I am today, still practicing.
So a lot of the groups that you work with now are in international development, with the UN or the World Bank or groups like that, and you're getting groups to collaborate and cooperate on real deliverables globally, many of whom haven't met before, have communications issues, have spotty connections to the internet. How do you get them to be a cohesive group, or help them be a cohesive group?
Well, I first have to say that often when I'm working with people in international development who have much less connectivity materials, they're often much more highly motivated to be connected because they're not physically co-located with similar practitioners or the practitioners they want to be connected with. So motivation can trump all those barriers. And I think in many ways, many of us in North America and Northern Europe are freaking spoiled. So we're often not willing to try very hard. So it's interesting, the cultural context can color a lot of what happens. The second thing is that there's always this combination between the task-oriented and the technology that can support that task, and the relational or the social interactions, which of course are going to be colored by culture, by job culture as much as national culture. And I'd say in the groups I work with a lot of research scientists, and job culture often trumps national culture. One's, well, this is how we do it in plant science, and this is how we do it in social science, and all that sort of stuff becomes the interesting thing. But what is always the cement is there clarity on what our goals are? Is there enough clarity on our tasks? A lot of the tasks are emergent, and I can't do a Gantt chart for certain projects because we don't know what's going to happen. But is there enough clarity that we can work in an emergent manner? And then have we figured out the kind of right rhythm of conversation that holds both the task and that social element? And that rhythm of conversation varies a lot by teams. And the larger the teams, the more difficult it is to suss that out. The smaller teams, you could do that pretty quickly.
So when a team is just starting out, do you give them smaller tasks to help them see what collaboration feels like, or what do you do to get them started, to give them the push?
So, there is this old analogy that's often used, is that when a runner first starts learning how to run, their heart's beating, boom, 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 and they're breathing. And so early teams need to have a rapid heartbeat. So often it is bringing together synchronous moments in the asynchronous work, because when I work globally, there's no way we're all going to be synchronous all the time. Please. I neither want it nor could it happen. But what are those moments that we come together? That heartbeat has to be fairly close together. Once a team has been in training, they don't need that gasping rapid heartbeat. And those synchronous moments can be much further spread apart. So there's part of this about timing. And the second is, as you say, is this sort of right-sized bites for the beginning of a team. And what we're doing is trying to build rapid transactional trust. So we want to do something that requires you and I to get something done that we can't get done alone in a defined time period in a way that both of us can say yes and both of us are able enough to do it. And that starts building transactional trust. And a lot of distributed teams never need relational trust. Transactional trust is sufficient. If they're really complicated teams, they need the relational. But those little initial bite-sized, right-sized bites at the beginning can help build transactional trust and develop that rhythm. So it's timing and trust in right-sized bites.
So when you're working with a group of people and they have let's do it again.
I keep on pulling up my scarf over my yoga top. We're just really ripping it here. This is distributed teams, though, Jim. This is actually what it's about. It's about practice, rehearsal, getting better, but it's never rehearsal. It's always live. Every little bit a team does is living into that experience. And if it's even through a little teeny video that gives us that moment of, oh my God, this is not working, let's switch it up, or let's change it, or that was funny, or that you're human and I'm human. These are actually the things that create the social fabric for good distributed teams. Goofing off and goofing up, but figuring out how to recover from the goof ups. So now you have to keep that all in.
We'll work with it. So one of the things that we see is that teams need regular check-ins, so that they keep each other's pulse, they keep each other the personal relationship with each other. But when people are divided up by large discrepancies in time zones, that becomes a problem. So how do you help people normalize time zones, have a little bit of time zone etiquette, I guess, for highly distributed teams?
Well, first, check-ins can be asynchronous. So we don't always need to have check-ins be synchronous. So I think about a team that I'm working with now, and we use Slack as kind of that social fabric check-in, and some of the channels are really just for what are you doing today, how's it going, and the other channels are for, here's the deliverables, here's the task, whatever. And so just checking in again and seeing what people are doing overnight. Now I wake up and they've been working for 8 hours. That is often enough to get me going into knowing what's happening with them pretty quickly. The second thing is, for synchronous stuff, is you got to share the pain. One time I have to stay up till 2 a.m. Next time you got to get up at 4 a.m. We have to spread that out. And this is super important for organizations like, let's say I'm working with a Microsoft team here in Seattle, and they've got programmers in India. And the center of power is the headquarters. You've got to make sure that leadership shares the pain with the distributed, the people who are in the satellites, because otherwise you start emphasizing power differential, which can totally mess up the team. So I think those in headquarters have to be more sensitive to time differentials than those in the far-flung areas. And the pain should be shared, and the pain sharing should be role modeled by the leaders first.
And I guess one last question is, when you notice that somebody is starting to drift, that they're either not getting their stuff done on time, or the work that they're doing isn't what people are expecting, do you have a kind of a go-to mechanism that both lets you check in and maybe diffuse the situation?
It really varies by team, okay? A lot of the teams I'm in, we don't have a boss. So there's no kind of boss saying, okay, Nancy, you know, you haven't shown up, you're slacking. So in those sort of teams, that has to be part of the group practice. We have to look out for each other, and it's not just me looking out for everyone else. So sometimes we'll make some explicit agreements early on saying, you know, if I'm slacking, please tell me sooner rather than later. Don't let it build up. And then we need to practice that a little bit, because usually the first few times we feel awkward. In a team where there is hierarchy, there is a boss, I think you can rely on more traditional things like, you know, I expected that by Friday, what's up? And the medium for making that communication would, for me, varies by person. There's some people who prefer that in a private message or an email. There's some who, you know, I need to get voice to voice or video to video. So that I would use the contextual stuff. So places where there's a lot of power differential, first I would message with, I wanted to check in on this. Did I miss the email? You know, I sort of take it on myself. In places where I can be very direct, I'll just say, what the heck, where are you? So again, I use contextual and cultural decision-making points. But when I'm boss, I definitely am fairly aggressive on following up and not letting it sit.
So Nancy, why should you pay attention to the relational, to how people interact with each other and with the project and their work?
Because if you don't, it's going to kick you in the butt. And the interesting thing is, you know, what relational means to one person is very different than what relational means to another person. When I'm working with a bunch of very introverted people, I have to hold that relational piece much more carefully and loosely. When I'm working with a bunch of gregarious people, I have to put out more energy to make sure I'm engaging with it. But if we don't engage in the relational, we often don't get to know each other with sufficient depth, and therefore we start making really stupid assumptions about how other people are getting or giving messages. So the relational thing is important regardless of the type of people you're working with, but the way you build a relationship will vary. And I think sometimes we think, you know, tell me about your favorite work experience is enough. It's not. It's got to be something like peel the onion a little bit slowly. So build a little bit of social time into your interactions and try and peel the onion a little bit, because then when you hit the wall, I'm much more likely to cut you slack if I know that you love chocolate and in the end we can share chocolate even though we may be disagreeing. Is that when you find something in common with someone, even if they're very different than you, when it comes to moment of conflict, that will increase the ability to cut that person slack. And this I do not mean technological slack, I mean personal slack.